Okay, so this is really weird, and I don't know what to do about it. I don't even know if anyone will ever read this, but it's all I can do to keep my mind intact. I've been wandering the streets for weeks, unable to re-enter my home. I've never been what you'd call a motivated person. I was a solid C student in high school, college dropout, and I work at Kinko's full-time to pay my shoddy one-bedroom apartment rent and my meager food bills. I was never hurting, not really. I just didn't really have much of a direction, I suppose. My parents bemoaned the way I lived constantly. They tell me I had such potential when I was a kid. I had good grades, my writing was so talented, I had so many opportunities. I excelled at baseball and track. I've probably still got some spelling bee trophies I won throughout elementary school somewhere around here. The world was my oyster, and it seemed like middle school would be a continuation of my excellence. Then, I discovered World of Warcraft. I know, it's a cop-out, but the game kinda took over my life. Suddenly, I didn't care about tests. I didn't care about extracurriculars, and if I still wrote, it was fanfic about the game that I loved. This affair started in 6th grade, and my parents are probably still kicking themselves for paying my subscription fees. Suddenly, my own priorities seemed to be doing my chores so I could get enough allowance to keep paying for my monthly subscriptions. I would spend hours online, which only worsened as I grew older. I was actually playing World of Warcraft when it happened. I had gotten off of work an hour ago, and I had hit the game as soon as I got home. My guild was raiding, and I was settling in for 8 hours of solid gaming. I was off the next day, so I could sleep tomorrow away if I wanted to. What did I have to get up for anyway? All my friends were online, so sleeping until I finally felt like getting up sounded pretty good to me. When the weird light started emanating from behind me, I thought it was my lava lamp at first. I started hearing someone talking, someone behind me as opposed to over my headset, and I glanced behind me to see a strange, wavering portal. It was like looking too far down the road on a hot day, and it seemed to shimmer over the dirty floor to my bedroom. There were 2 people standing in it. One of them was a tall man in a suit and a top hat, casting his hand to me as though showing something to the other. The other was a child, barely older than 12, looking confused in his pajamas. My eyes grew a little wider. That kid was me.
See what your future holds if you stay on this path. Your dreams, your ambitions, all gone as you wallow in perpetual stagnation.
The younger me looked around, seeming horrified, before begging the man to take him home.
As you wish.
And suddenly, they were gone. I sat there, listening to my guildmaster ask if I was still there. What the hell had that been? It had ended as quickly as it had begun, and left me thinking that something otherworldly had just happened. I had seen myself at the age just before I had given up, but I had no memories of what had happened. No one had ever visited me and taken me on a Dickensian look into my future. It had never happened, and yet I had seen myself seeing me, and the feeling of horror on that young face had been startling. I tried to get back into the game, but the thoughts of that little kid looking at me with real horror kept distracting me. A few minutes later, I told them I felt sick and took myself off to bed. I lay there thinking about what I had seen, wondering if it had all been a dream or a delusion or what the hell had happened. The look on the youngster's face had been deeply troubling, and I just couldn't shake it. What had that even been? Why didn't I remember it? I went to sleep thinking of these things, and they followed me into my dreams. I slept poorly that night. The strangeness started the next day. I had woken up at 1 o'clock in the afternoon and sat down with a bowl of cereal. I was ready to play for the day. I had sort of put the event of the night before out of my mind and decided that it was just something I had dreamed up. I had felt sick last night and dreamed about seeing a ghostly figure. My brain knew otherwise, but I had gotten pretty good at deluding myself after convincing myself that things were fine for so long. It started with something easily overlooked. I logged in and started trying to find a group for one of the lower level characters I was playing. I wanted to run a specific dungeon, but they seemed to ignore me when I asked to join their group. I thought it was kind of rude, but the longer it went on, the madder I got about it. I raged about it in chat, but it also went uncommented on there. I changed characters, thinking maybe it was a glitch, but I was still roundly ignored by everyone. After about an hour, I gave up and logged off. I tried playing other games I enjoyed, but no one seemed to see or comment on anything I said in-game. It was like I was invisible. I went down to the corner store to get something to eat, a pack of ramen and a sandwich, and I had to smack the counter a few times before the guy behind it would look at me. He was stocking cigarettes, but I know he saw me. I asked him why he didn't acknowledge me sooner, but he just told me to have a nice day and wandered off. After I ate, I went back to bed, and I lay there fuming. I wish, now, that I had only been limited to being overlooked in games. The next day I had to work. I got up at 9, showered, ate breakfast, and put my uniform on. I thought about calling in. I was still kind of put out from yesterday, but I decided against it. Maybe a day of work would make me feel a little better. People would have to notice me if I was at work, right? I grabbed my keys and headed out to Kinko's. It started to become more noticeable when I got to work. At first, a coworker wouldn't say hi to me. Then it was time to clock in, but the time clock refused to let me clock in with my thumbprint. I went to Mary, my boss, but she just ignored me. I shouted and pushed things off her desk, and only that seemed to really draw her attention. She asked what the hell I was doing, and when I told her I couldn't clock in, she asked who I was. I looked at her, unbelieving. I've worked at this Kinko's for 7 years. Mary's the one who hired me. I told her my name after she started getting rude about it, and she typed it in and just shook her head. Sorry, looks like you don't work at this location. Are you supposed to start at the Francis Park store today or something? I cut her off, though. I told her that I had worked here for 7 years. I told her we'd interacted almost daily since I started. I had literally been to her house, swam in her pool, gone to high school with her son. She stared at me blankly and said she had no idea who I was. She suggested that I check with the Francis Park store, but told me I would have to leave. After a little more arguing, she threatened to call the cops if I didn't leave immediately. Thinking back on it, she wasn't even really angry when she threatened to call the police. She spoke to me in that way you might boredly tell someone that it's time they left. She never looked up from her work, simply wanting the momentary nuisance of me to go away. When I left, she never even acknowledged it. I went home in a rage, not understanding what was going on, but my mind kept returning to that kid and the man in the top hat. Maybe it was the time of the year, but the whole thing made me feel very Scrooge-like. Had not Ebenezer Scrooge been shown his future by a ghost? Perhaps I was the future yet to come. I shook my head, trying to get it out of my brain. The whole thing was just too weird, too Dickensian. The mood wasn't helped by the reception I received online. People ignored me again, the very thing I had already been mad about. And even worse, some of them asked where I was. They claimed they hadn't seen me in a few days and were starting to get worried. Others claimed they thought they had seen me online yesterday, but they couldn't be sure. I told them I was here, asked what sort of game they thought they were playing, but they didn't respond. I finally logged out and went to get some takeout. If I couldn't drown my sorrows in online games, I would drown them in cheap Chinese food. When I reached for the door, though, there was a moment of vertigo as my hand slipped through the knob. I pulled it away like a kid who's touched a hot stove, but when I reached again, my hand gripped it this time, and I turned it normally. I looked at it for a few seconds, knowing what I had seen, but not quite believing it. I closed the door behind myself, wondering vacantly if I'd be able to get back in again. As I walked down the road, the garish lights of Christmas twinkled about me. It suddenly hit me that it was December 21st, and I hadn't bought a single thing for my parents. I hadn't gotten them anything the year before that either, but it was weird that they hadn't called to ask if I'd be around for Christmas. As I walked down the sidewalk, people avoided me easily, none of them so much as grunting at me, or excusing themselves, or telling me to get the hell out of the way. It was the holidays, but people usually told you to fuck yourself when you got in their way in my town. I was beginning to feel unwanted, if not a little unseen, as I slumped my shoulders and continued on. The trip was ultimately fruitless anyway. I stood in line at the restaurant, but the guy behind me stepped up to order instead as I approached the counter. The guy at the register took no notice of me, and instead began to take his order. I shouted at them, banging on the counter, but they just ignored me. What the hell was going on? I shouted at the others in line, but no one so much as looked at me. Finally, I just turned to leave, reaching out to catch the door as it swung shut. The bar passed right through my hands, and I slid through the glass front as I stumbled out onto the street. I ran then, my frantic running attracting no attention. I wish it had been that easy to pass back into my apartment, but I never found it. I ran to my apartment complex, but my apartment was gone. The space was empty, a blank wall that had never had a door on it, but had indeed had a door on it barely an hour ago. No matter how much I slammed my hands against the wall, it refused to return to reality. After an hour of just leaning there, hoping for something, I turned and left. I've been on the streets ever since. I don't even know how long I've been here, but I see the lights and know that it's that time of year again. I walk the streets alone. No one notices me. No one speaks to me. It's as if I don't even exist. I've been living in the library that I used to go to when I was a kid, reading books and trying to muster the strength to write this. You see, it's like that scene out of the movie Ghost. If I concentrate very, very hard, I can turn a page or strike a key on the computer. It gets easier the more I practice, but it takes a toll sometimes. I've been typing my story for quite some time now, hiding it on the librarian's computer so she won't delete it. It's almost ready to post now, and I'm hoping that unlike my past friends, someone can see my final message. I've wondered long and hard, you see, about what happened to the characters in A Christmas Carol after Scrooge had his change of heart. Did they cease to exist? Or did they live in this strange limbo like me? I wonder what my past self saw that was really so terrible. Am I such a nightmare that he felt he had to change his future so drastically? Did he return to the past and hurt himself in response to seeing how badly things were going for me? I don't know. I don't even know why I'm telling any of you this. I suspect it's simply for the purpose of telling you that I existed once, as much as I ever existed. When I'm finally allowed to be no more, I want someone to know that I was more, or less, I guess, than the ghost I am today. Good evening, everyone. It's me, Dr. Plague. Thank you so much for joining me for tonight's story. I hope you enjoyed the last of my Christmas tales, because I fear that this is the last one of the season. So I hope you've enjoyed this little schedule we've got going on here. I think that the 3 times a week is something I'm going to maintain in the new year. Fingers crossed. I'm going to try. This may, of course, mean that you might hear some other writers' works on my channel. I may debut some of No Sleep's other writers here, just to, pad out my content a little bit. Before we go, let's thank our sponsors. Thanks to Leslie Lou Riddle for being our Spooky Skeleton tier contributor. Thanks, Leslie. We just couldn't do it without you. If you too would like to support the show, come on down to Patreon. For just $5 a month, you too can be one of my Spooky Skeleton tier contributors and have your name read out at the end of every TikTok and every YouTube video that I make. You could also come buy a book on Amazon. We're reading Dark Vortex right now for my Wednesday stories, so if you'd like to read along with the YouTube videos, come on down. We can start a little book club. It'll be fun. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening and a spooky holiday season.